This video will go over some very limited basics on how to get great audio for your podcast, YouTube, or streaming needs, no matter how much money you have, nor how much you've spent. That being said, let's dispel the biggest myth in how to get great audio for your content: cost. You do not need expensive equipment to get great audio. A mega YouTuber's $2,000 microphone has limited, if anything, to do with getting great results. The key to getting great audio is knowing how to use whatever you have, regardless of cost. If you know what you're doing with cheap gear, it will sound perfect compared to an ignorant person that spent thousands. So, put the cost myth out of your mind. It's an excuse and a lie. Be encouraged by the fact that you can get amazing results with whatever you likely already have, even if it's cheap. Now that you're hopefully relieved that you don't need to spend thousands of dollars, let's dive right into how to get the best results using whatever you already have. First, your recording space. Whatever your room sounds like is what your recordings will sound like. In fact, expensive, sensitive microphones will only make a bad room sound worse. Don't freak out or worry that you have to buy a bunch of expensive acoustic foam. You don't. Either move the microphone to a more acoustically dead location, or if you can't move your setup, break up audio reflections in your room by moving in some furniture and hanging some things on the wall. Everything that you bring into the room will deflect, absorb, and weaken sound waves, which is a good thing. That's what you want. Drawers, lamps, drapes, mattresses, rugs, chairs, all of it will tame reflections. Ever notice how a cluttered room is much less echoey than an empty one? Once you've deadened the sound by putting more crap in your room, make sure your microphone is as close to your mouth as possible. A few inches is the most desirable, but just do your best. Keep in mind that the further the microphone is from the source, your mouth in this case, the more room noise you'll pick up and the weaker the source will sound. This is called the proximity effect. It is one reason why controlling your room noise is so critical, especially if you can't keep your microphone close to your mouth. Now, aim the diaphragm of the mic towards your mouth. I say diaphragm because that's what actually picks up the sound. There can be some confusion about microphone orientation. It depends on the microphone. Just make sure you're not talking into the top of a microphone that's designed to pick up sound from the front. Technically speaking, this is called top address or side address. Toss that casually into your next first date to guarantee a second. Typically, the front of your microphone will have the logo on it. So, now that you've reduced how terrible your room sounds and you know where to place your microphone in relation to your mouth, that's 90% of the battle. The last 10% is what separates your audio from rich noobs. Plugins. Knowing how to use plugins. Don't worry, it's not scary. It's really only a few basic things: an EQ, a compressor, and a limiter. While we're about to go over some of the very basics, these basics are literally the difference between noob and pro. And the cost of your gear virtually doesn't matter. Quick note. I say plugins because that's what most people will be using, but the same rules apply to IRL audio equipment with actual knobs and dials. First, be sure you've got a good input level. This is super easy to achieve. Don't worry. Just go into your audio settings and move the input slider up or down until you have a good level. One that's not too hot and not too quiet. I typically aim for around -18 to -10 decibels personally, but that's just me. Just so long as it's not too quiet or clipping, because digital clipping sounds horrible. Next, we'll move on to the actual plugins, but what I'm showing you here applies to any audio software. GarageBand, Pro Tools, Reason, Logic Pro, Audacity, it doesn't matter. Whether you've already recorded some audio for a podcast or you're live streaming with OBS or whatever, add an EQ and compressor to the individual audio channel, then a limiter to the master output. For the next portion of the video, I will change my voiceover to raw example audio, so you may need to adjust your volume to follow along. For your voice, use the EQ to eliminate any frequencies below 100 Hz or so. The actual frequency isn't critical, but what you're trying to do is eliminate anything below what you can normally reproduce with your voice. Nothing is down there but electrical hum, the rumble of traffic, and bumping the microphone stand with your hands or feet. If you want more sparkle in your voice, gently raise frequencies above 8 kilohertz or so. Now, this is incredibly subjective. There is no hard, fast rule to cosmetic EQing, but I'll just say that less is more. Subtlety is the key. Next, open the compressor plugin. We use the compressor to even out our voice's volume. In brief, to make a scream no different than a whisper. These are very basic crash course settings, but set the ratio to 4:1. If there is a knee, set it to maybe 1 or 2 decibels. If there isn't a knee function, then don't worry about it. Set the attack to something around 1 millisecond or less. Again, these are just crash course settings. Set the release to about 100 milliseconds, and again, these are just basic. Now we move to the threshold setting. This is where the magic happens, so to speak. Go to the quietest part of your audio and bring down the threshold so that it barely starts activating the compressor. I'm going to speak softly for this next part so that we can set the threshold. Now I'm speaking very softly. This would be like if you're streaming Cyberpunk 2077 and your mom didn't actually allow you to buy it, or you were supposed to be in bed 2 hours ago. Not on Twitch, fragging noobs. So at this point, you'll probably see that I've adjusted the threshold low enough to barely start affecting this quiet audio. Now, as I return my voice to normal speaking levels, you'll notice that it's very close in volume to the whisper. Heck, even if I yell, it doesn't get much louder. Now the compression is set to a good overall value. My whispering is just as loud as my normal voice, but now it's all too low. Move to the makeup gain slider, or it could be called wet or output or whatever. Bring it up so that the volume peaks around -10 decibels or so. Adjust your headphones and speakers now before my video volume gets louder. We only brought the compressor output volume to -10 so that we have headroom. Headroom is key to building a mix. You'll see in the next step why we want this headroom to work with. Go to your master output and open the limiter. A limiter is like an extreme compressor, and the controls are very similar, if not identical. You can even use some compressors as limiters. Remember the compressor ratio? Technically, any compression ratio over 20:1 is now a limiter. If possible, set the limiter ratio to the maximum possible. Set the attack and release to the fastest, aka shortest possible. Next, set the limiter's threshold so it barely starts affecting the overall mix's volume. Remember how I left my vocal track peaking around -10 decibels? This should be more or less how the limiter's threshold should be set. Next, bring up the limiter's output so nothing peaks past -0.1 decibels. The entire mix is now limited to a nice, hot -0.1 dB. You could bring it up to 0 dB, but I like the safety net of that extra tenth of a decibel, and nobody can hear the difference anyway of a tenth of a decibel. And that's pretty much it for now. I hope these basics help. If you're struggling, these settings should be an infinite help. From here, it's a matter of tinkering and experimenting, so have fun. Thank you so much for watching. You are worthy of love and your own self-respect. Check out the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast app. Just look for the red, white, and black color scheme. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you'd consider subscribing, I'd be honored. I have lots of neat videos on my channel, from modern tech to vintage computers to just messing around with my 1983 DeLorean. So feel free to check them out. Take care.